I spent 6 years looking for my daughter in other people's windows. I found her in Corliss, behind the glass, in a kitchen that wasn't hers, wearing a sweater I'd never bought her, and she was smiling. She was happy. And that is the worst thing I have ever seen in my life, and I have seen the inside of a lot of houses on the worst day of a lot of people's lives, so understand that I mean it. Let me tell you how I got there, because the how is the part that still keeps me up, not the ghost of it, the paperwork of it, the way it was arranged so carefully that I drove myself to it with my own 2 hands and thanked the man who sent me. I repossess things for a living. That's the honest word. I drive a box truck for a rent-to-own outfit, and when somebody stops paying on a couch, or a fridge, or a big flat television they were never going to finish paying for anyway, the account comes to me, and I go take it back, 11 years of it. You learn to keep your face still while a woman cries in her own doorway. You learn to say, "I'm real sorry about this," in a voice that means nothing, because if it meant something you couldn't lift the other end of the sofa. I'm telling you what I am so you'll understand what I'm not. I'm not a dreamer. I'm not a man who sees things. I'm the coldest, most literal person you will ever meet because I made myself that way on purpose, and it cost me the only thing that ever mattered, and I'll get to that. Her name is Nora, my daughter. She was 19 when she left, and left is the word the police used, and left is the word I have hated for 6 years, because a 19-year-old girl doesn't leave her phone charging on the nightstand. She doesn't leave her paycheck uncashed in her coat. She doesn't leave the truck she saved up for sitting in the driveway with a full tank. People don't leave the way Nora left. People are taken the way Nora left, and I knew it, and I couldn't prove it. And after 18 months, the detective stopped returning my calls and put her face in a drawer. Here's the guilt, since these things always come down to guilt. The last real conversation I had with my daughter, I was taking something away from her. She'd co-signed a little loan for a boyfriend, a nothing loan, a used car, and he'd skipped, and the account came across my desk, and instead of being her father, I was the finance company for one evening. I sat at my own kitchen table, and I explained her own debt to her in my work voice, that flat, cold voice I used on strangers, and she looked at me like she was watching a door close. She said, "You take things from people all day, and then you come home, and you're still doing it." And I said something back, something about the real world, something a small man says, and she went up to her room, and 3 weeks later she was gone, and I have spent 6 years driving rural routes with her flyer folded in my visor, checking every window I pass, because somewhere in the back of my cold, literal head, I decided that if I looked at enough windows, one of them would have her in it. I want you to hold on to that, because it turns out I was right. I just had the wrong idea about what kind of window. Corliss came to me on a Tuesday in October. 6 open accounts in one dying town, which is a lot, which should have been a flag, but the quarter was closing and my manager, Dell, wanted it cleaned up. Corliss is up in the folds off the state route where the signal dies, an old mill town, turbine plant closed in the 90s, the kind of place that's been quietly going out like a coal for 30 years. 6 televisions to collect from people who'd stopped paying. That's all it was on the sheet. 6 televisions. I came down the grade a little before 5, with the light already going gray, and the first thing I noticed was that nobody was out. That's not strange by itself. Cold afternoon, folks inside. But I drove the whole length of Maine, and there wasn't a soul. Not a dog. Not a kid. The diner had its open sign lit, and its door propped, and 2 plates of food going cold on the counter and nobody behind it. And every window I passed had the flicker in it. You know the flicker. That blue-white pulse of a television going in a dark room, throbbing against the ceiling. Every house had one. In the middle of a dead afternoon, in a town with nobody in it, 200 screens were lit up and breathing, and I remember I actually laughed, because in my line of work that's a joke. That's a full truck. At least I'll have plenty to take. First address. A little white house, chain link fence, a wheelchair ramp built out of raw lumber, account under a Dolores Vance. Older woman, I figured, because the accounts out there were all older folks who'd bought one nice thing to keep them company. I knocked. I called out the lie we always call out, "Miss Vance, value living." I called about the account, and the door swung open because it wasn't locked, and the house hit me with a wall of warmth and the smell of fresh coffee. The set was in the front room, 50-inch, exactly the model on my sheet, and it was on, and it was playing the local news. Except we don't have local news up there. Nearest station is 2 counties over, and it has never in its life said the word Corliss. But there was a woman at an anchor desk, and behind her a blue graphic that said Corliss, and she was talking, pleasant and even, about a fall festival on Main Street. And then they cut to the footage, and the footage was Main Street. The exact street I'd just driven down, dead and empty. Except in the footage it was full. People in jackets moving along the storefronts. Kids. A man selling something off a cart. The diner packed and steamed up. The camera panned, and I saw this house, this exact house with the raw lumber ramp, and an old woman sitting at the top of it in a patch of sun, waving at whoever was holding the camera. Old tape, I told myself. Community access thing. A better year, playing on a loop. That's the kind of explanation I reach for. Always. The flattest one on the shelf. I bent to unplug the set, and the woman on the screen said, "And if you're just joining us here in Corliss," and I stood up, and the picture had changed. It was the inside of a house now. This house. This front room shot from up in the corner by the ceiling, and I could see the couch, the coffee table, the front door standing open the way I'd left it. But I wasn't in it. The room on the screen was empty of me. And while I stood there, the old woman walked into the frame from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and she sat down on the couch and picked up the remote and settled in to watch her show like it was any ordinary afternoon of her life. I put the television back down. I did not unplug it. I walked out to my truck and sat there with my hands on the wheel, and I built myself the tidy little story. I was tired. I'd skipped lunch. The light does things out here. And then I did the thing I will never be able to forgive, which is, I did not leave. I had 5 more sets to collect. I told myself I'd just knock, write them up inaccessible if it was more of the same, and go home. But that's the lie on top of the lie. The truth is duller and worse. I wanted to see it again. That's the thing nobody tells you. It doesn't have to chase you. It just has to be warm and let you look. The second house was the same. Unlocked door, running heat, a bottle of formula going warm on the counter, and a television showing that house. A young couple, a baby in a high chair, an ordinary dinner in a kitchen that behind me was cold and dark. On the screen the baby laughed and the mother reached over and wiped its chin, and I stood there in the dark real kitchen watching the warm fake one until I came outside and the sky was somehow darker than it should have been. Third house, a man's recliner still holding his shape, a cigarette burned all the way down to a worm of ash in the tray, still smoking a little, and on that screen turned his head. When I called out, "The resident," a heavy old fella in the recliner on the screen turned his head. He turned and looked up into the corner where the camera would be, which is to say he looked out at me, standing in his real living room, and he patted the arm of the couch beside him. "Who's finally showing up to a thing you've been holding a seat for," and he patted the arm of the couch beside him. I did not go closer to that one. I knew and watched every explanation die. Standing on his porch after, with the cold finally getting through to me, I ran the list of everything I knew and watched every explanation die. Evacuation? War. Cars in the driveways. Food on the tables. Nobody evacuates and leaves the coffee on. Gas leak? I'd smell it. And a leak doesn't put your neighbors inside your television. A film crew. A prank. A cult down at the church. So I walked to the church, and the church was the only cold building in the whole town, dark and dead, and the television bolted up in the fellowship hall was on, and it showed the church full of Corliss. Everybody I hadn't found in the houses, sitting in the pews in their good clothes, all of them facing the front, and there was somebody at the pulpit, but I could never see who. Every time my eye went to the front of that room, the picture blurred, worn through, like the one spot on the tape that's been played too many times. And that's when I understood the shape of it, even though I will never understand the thing. The town wasn't empty. Everybody was still here. They were just on the other side of the glass, living the warm afternoon, the festival, the dinner, the service. And from in there, our side, the real side, the cold side with me on it, must have looked like the empty one, must have looked like nothing at all. If you asked Dolores Vance where the town went, she'd tell you it was right here, warm and bright and full, and some fella from the finance company never did show up to take her TV. I should have run then. I had it figured as well as it can be figured. I had the truck. I had the road. Instead, I looked at the next address on my sheet, because I am who I am, and the name on the fourth account stopped my heart. The account holder was listed as N. Ellery. Ellery is my name. Nora Ellery is my daughter's name. Now, it's not the rarest name in the world, and my hands were already shaking when I told myself that. Lots of Ellerys. I never had family up in Corliss, never been within 40 miles of it. No reason on this earth for my daughter's name to be printed on a repossession account in a dead town. I drove to the address on legs that weren't working right, and it was a little green house up on Sycamore, and the door was open, and the heat was on, and there was a television going in the front room, and she was in it. That Nora? My Nora. 19 years old, exactly 19, not a day added for the 6 years she's been gone. Standing at a kitchen counter in a yellow sweater I have never in my life seen. Slicing an apple the way she used to when she was little, in wedges, always in wedges. And she looked up out of the screen, right at me, and her whole face opened the way it used to when I'd come home before I got cold, before I became the man who takes things, back when she was small enough to run at the door. She looked at me like that, and she looked at me like that, toward me, and she waved me in. She came toward the camera, toward me, and she waved me in. I have replayed that moment more than any other, and here is what I need you to understand, because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on. Away. My daughter did not leave her charging phone and her uncashed check and her full tank of gas and leave. She was received. She has been here, in the warm afternoon, in the town that's always full, for 6 years, exactly 19, exactly happy, waving me into rooms I kept driving past, because I was looking in the wrong kind of window. 6 years I checked glass for her face, and I was right the whole time. I just never looked long enough. Because you can't. That's the whole trick of it. It only takes a half a second on the highway, a flicker over a gas pump, gone before you can be sure. And I'd trained myself, God help me, to be a man who's never sure. I put my hand on the front door. And I'm going to tell you honestly, I nearly walked through it. Not because I was fooled. Because it was mercy. Because there was a version of the afternoon right there, close as the glass, where Nora was 19 and happy, and none of it had happened. Where I hadn't sat at that kitchen table and read her back her own debt in my work voice. Where I hadn't become a man who could. Where I could put it down. 6 years of guilt is heavy, and it was offering to take it, and all I had to do was agree that the warm side was the real one and step in. My hand was on the door. What stopped me was small. It's always small. On the screen, behind Nora, there was a calendar on the wall, one of those free ones from a hardware store, and I looked at it, and it said October. And I thought about the fall festival on the news. And the leaves in the footage on Main Street all turned that same deep October red. And I understood that it is always October in there. It is always this one afternoon. Dolores at the top of her ramp in the same patch of sun, the same cigarette never burning down. My daughter forever 19, forever slicing the same apple into the same wedges, forever waving me in, and never, not once, getting one day older, one day past, one day free. She wasn't saved. She was kept. The warm afternoon isn't a place where the taken get to live. It's the place where they get to stay exactly where they were caught, warm and smiling and stopped, playing the good moment over and over like the worn spot on the tape, forever. If I stepped through, I wouldn't get my daughter back. I'd just be caught in the frame beside her, the two of us waving at the next cold, literal fool who drives down the grade and looks too long. And the thing that broke me, the thing that finally moved my hand off that door, was watching her wave. Because she wasn't waving at me, not really. Her eyes weren't tracking me. She was waving at the camera the way all of them looked at the camera, warm and patient and empty, and I realized my daughter didn't know it was me. She wasn't calling her father in. She was just the bait the way Dolores was bait, the way the old man patting the couch was bait, her sweetest moment worn smooth and hung in the window to bring the next one home. I took my hand off the door and I left my daughter in that house for the second time in my life. And if there is a hell, it is that, doing that, twice. I don't remember the walk to the truck. I remember the key and the radio coming on that hasn't worked in a year, that same pleasant anchor voice. And here's a live look at our visitor, and the television in the window across the street flickering to a shot of my truck from the front, filmed from about where I was sitting, showing me in the truck, looking at the screen that was looking at me. Then it cut to me from a minute ago, walking up to the greenhouse. Then it cut to me from the future, me getting out of the truck, walking back up the porch, opening the green door, going in, the door closing behind me. None of which I was doing, all of which the warm side had already recorded, because over there I'd already agreed, over there it was already done, and my hand started drifting toward the door handle because the version on the glass was starting to feel like the one that counted. I put the truck in reverse and my foot to the floor, and I said the road out loud the whole way up the grade. Yellow line, gravel shoulder, mile marker, anything cold and real in mine. Until the trees closed over and the last blue flicker of Corliss was gone behind me, and even that dead radio finally shut its mouth. Now here's where you get to decide I'm a liar. That. I filed it clean. Told Dell the town was evacuated, accounts inaccessible, and then, casual as I could manage with my hands still not right, I asked him where he'd gotten the Corliss accounts. And Dell looked at his screen and frowned and said they'd come in on a batch transfer, no originating branch, no rep, just showed up in the system flagged to my route. He said, and I'll never forget how little he thought of it. Weird, one of M's even got your last name. Small world. Small world. Somebody built those accounts. Somebody put my daughter's name on a repossession slip in a town I'd never been to, and flagged the batch to my route and let the quarter close do the rest, and drove me down that grade with my own hands, and I thanked him for the work. It reaches for you through what you've lost. That's how it fills the town. It doesn't come and get you. It finds the hole in you and it puts something warm in the shape of the thing you're missing right up against the glass, and it lets you drive to it. I called the county. And the sheriff's office told me, polite and a little confused, that Corliss doesn't have anyone to evacuate. That the plant closed in '96 and the town bled out over the next 15 years and the last resident left, they figured around 2011, that it's been a ghost town for over a decade. No power, no water. Lines cut years back. No power. Sit with that. I stood in warm houses. I smelled fresh coffee. 200 televisions were running. They sent a deputy out on account of I wouldn't let it go. He drove down into Corliss the next week and found exactly what the records promised. Empty houses, sagging roofs, 15 years of weather coming through the broken windows, no food, no coffee, no cars, no Dolores Vance, no greenhouse on Sycamore with anybody in it. And in every front room, he said, a television. Old ones mostly, the heavy tube kind, screens gray with a decade of dust, and not one of them plugged into a thing, because there was nothing to plug into. Every single one of them, he told me, was warm to the touch. He didn't put that in the report. He told me on the phone, quiet, like it was a question he didn't want answered. Said he'd rested his hand on one out of habit, and it was warm. The way a set is warm after it's run a long while, and he took his hand off it, and he doesn't drive out that way anymore. That was 14 months ago. I don't keep a television now. But that's the thing nobody warns you about deciding to stop looking at screens. You can't. They're in every waiting room and checkout line, every gas pump, every phone on every bus, the big bright boards along the highway now. And every so often, not often, but enough, one of them flickers and there's Corliss, Main Street. That gray October light, the open sign in the diner. Half a second and it's gone, and I've stopped trying to point it out to strangers, and you can imagine how that went the times I tried. It changed 3 days ago. That's really why I'm telling this. The little screen over a gas pump off the interstate glitched, and there was Main Street, but the camera wasn't panning the way it used to. It was holding still, pointed up the street, steady, like it was set on a tripod and left there to wait. And at the far end of the street, small, there was a figure, standing, facing out, facing me. And even too far to have a face, I knew her. The way you know your own child from across any distance in any light. It was Nora, not at a counter, not waving, not slicing an apple. Just standing at the end of the street, out in the cold part of the picture where the townspeople never go, looking down the lens at me, patient as the grave. She's not bait in a window anymore. She came out to the end of the street, to the edge of the glass, to the closest she can get to my side. She's not waiting to be rescued. She's waiting for me to stop being sure. And I need you to understand the part I can barely write, which is that some nights I want to. Some nights I sit in the dark where the television used to be, and I think about the warm afternoon and the yellow sweater and the door I put my hand on, and I think about how heavy 6 years is, and how she's out there at the end of the street holding a seat for me the way I spent 6 years holding one for her, and I think she came all that way to the edge for me. And the wanting is so quiet and so warm that it scares me more than anything in that whole dead town ever did. I keep a phone with a cracked screen face down on the counter. I unplugged the microwave because the little clock glowed. I put a towel over the smoke detector's green light. I am making my whole life dark on purpose, one glow at a time, because I know exactly how this ends. I've watched it end 200 times, in 200 windows. She only has to catch me sure for half a second. And every year, I get a little more tired of being the coldest, most literal man you'll ever meet. If you're reading this and a screen near you flickers and you think, just for an instant, that you see someone you lost, someone warm, someone waving, someone who was never supposed to be there, don't look long enough to be sure. That's how they hold your seat. They found his truck 3 weeks ago at the top of the grade coming down into Corliss. Engine still running. Driver's door standing open. Nora Ellery's missing person flyer was folded in the visor where it had been for 6 years, and the man was not in the truck, and he was not in the town, which the responding deputy confirmed for the record is empty, has been empty since 2011, has no power and no water and no living soul in it. The deputy also noted, off the record, that when he walked Main Street he passed the diner, and its open sign was lit, though it cannot be, and inside on a mounted television the local news was playing a story about a fall festival, and the footage cut to Main Street, full of people, warm and bright, and turning October red, and at the far end of the street, in the footage, 2 figures stood together, a man and a girl. The girl had her hand tucked into the crook of his arm the way a daughter does, and they were both looking up out of the screen, and they were both, finally, smiling. And for the first time in 14 months, the deputy said, the camera began, slowly, to pan away, the way a camera does when the shot it was holding for is finally, patiently complete.